All right, let's dive right into a question that's frankly one of the biggest we face today. We're going to explore our relationship with the planet and specifically what we owe it. This is a journey through environmental ethics.
So it all boils down to this, really. What do we actually owe the natural world? And why? I mean, are we supposed to protect it just because it benefits us? Or maybe for our kids and grandkids? Or does nature have a right to exist all on its own, completely separate from us? How you answer that? Well, that changes everything.
For most of Western history, the answer was kind of simple. It was all about us. This idea is called anthropocentrism, which is just a fancy way of saying a human-centered worldview. Basically, in this way of thinking, nature is only valuable for what it can do for us. It's a tool, right? It gives us resources, it keeps us healthy. Heck, we even enjoy looking at it. Its value is purely instrumental. But okay, it's not quite that simple. Even within this humans first idea, there's a spectrum. On one end, you've got what's called strong anthropocentrism. This is that classic, almost biblical idea of dominion over nature. It's ours to use. But then there's a more, let's say, pragmatic version, weak anthropocentrism. This view is still all about human well-being, but it gets that, hey, our survival is completely tied to a healthy planet. So we protect nature, but it's really a smart, self-interested move. Okay, so now we're going to see how we start widening that moral circle. Because in the 20th century, things really started to shift. Thinkers began to ask a pretty radical question. Wait a minute, what if humans aren't the only things that matter? And that question kicked off this huge expansion of who or what we think deserves moral consideration. And this table really lays it all out for us. You can see the progression, right? We start with anthropocentrism, where it's just humans in the circle. Then that circle gets bigger with biocentrism. And suddenly every living thing has value. And finally, the circle expands to its widest point with ecocentrism, where the entire ecosystem, the whole shebang, is what matters. So let's zoom in on biocentrism for a second. This is a huge leap. It's the belief that all living things have what's called inherent worth. That means their value doesn't come from how useful they are to us. An elephant, a tree, even a microbe, they all have a right to exist and thrive just because they are. Their value is built in, it's intrinsic. So you might be wondering, where does a belief like that even come from? Well, it seems to bubble up from a couple of deep-seated human intuitions. First, there's the whole avoiding harm thing. It's basically our empathy kicking in. We just don't like the idea of hurting other living beings. But there's another piece to it, this idea of upholding purity. It's this feeling that nature is, well, sacred, and messing with it feels fundamentally wrong, like a moral stain. All right, so now we get to the holistic leap. This next step is maybe the biggest one of all. It asks us to zoom out, to stop looking at individual trees or animals, and instead, as the famous conservationist Aldo Leopold said, to start thinking like a mountain, to see the whole interconnected system all at once. And that brings us to ecocentrism. With this worldview, value doesn't just belong to the individual players anymore. The plants, the animals, nope. The value is in the entire biotic community. The species, sure, but also the rivers, the soil, the air, that whole incredibly complex web of life. The ecosystem itself is what's morally important. The whole is absolutely greater than the sum of its parts. And the person who really championed this idea was Aldo Leopold, with his famous land ethic. What he proposed was a total shift in how we see ourselves. He said, look, we have to stop thinking of ourselves as conquerors of the land, who can do whatever we want. Instead, we need to see ourselves as just plain members and citizens of this huge community of life. And as citizens, we have responsibilities. And this quote is really the heart of it all. It's his revolutionary moral compass. It's so simple, but so powerful. He says a thing is right if it helps the whole system, the biotic community, stay stable, beautiful, and integrated. And it's wrong if it does the opposite. Suddenly, the health of the entire community is the ultimate test of what's right and wrong. Of course, that opens up a whole other can of worms about how we define things like integrity or stability, but the core idea is a game changer. This ecocentric idea is really the engine behind what's known as deep ecology. And it makes a really important distinction. On one side, you have shallow ecology. That's kind of your mainstream environmentalism. Let's fight pollution and save resources so that humans can have a better life. It's still pretty human-centered. Deep ecology says, nope, not good enough. It calls for a complete break from that human-first mindset and argues for the inherent worth of, well, everything. All right, so let's bring this all down to earth, because these aren't just abstract ideas for philosophers to debate. They have massive, real-world consequences. This thinking leads directly to a powerful call for justice, not just for people, but for the planet itself.
And that brings us to this crucial concept, environmental justice. What this really highlights is that environmental harm, well, it's not spread out evenly. It's about basic fairness. It's about making sure that certain communities, often the most vulnerable, aren't the ones stuck with all the landfills, the polluting factories, and the worst effects of climate change. It's where the health of the planet and social justice slam right into each other.
And this is where you see a huge difference in how people approach this stuff. For a long time, a lot of Western conservation was very utilitarian. It was all about managing resources to get the most benefit for humans, which usually meant economic benefit. But compare that to many indigenous ethical systems, which are often built from the ground up on ideas of interconnectedness and give and take, reciprocity. That leads to these incredibly holistic ways of living that have kept ecosystems healthy for thousands of years. So if we follow this thread of justice, it leads us to an even more profound idea: reparative justice. This is a big one. It's not just about hitting the brakes and stopping future damage. It's about an active moral duty to go back and actually repair the harm that's already been done, the harm caused by this belief that humans are somehow superior to everything else. A great example of what this looks like in practice is rewilding. When you look at it through this lens of justice, rewilding isn't just a science project to bring back wolves or whatever. It becomes a moral act. You start by admitting, okay, we messed this place up. But then the real goal isn't just adding more biodiversity. It's about taking our hands off the controls, dismantling our dominance, and letting the ecosystem have its autonomy back, letting it heal itself. So what is our place in all this? After this whole journey, from seeing ourselves at the center of the universe to seeing ourselves as just one part of a vast web, we're left with this massive question about what our role is supposed to be. I mean, think about the journey we've just traced. We've seen our moral circle expand outward, like ripples in a pond. It started so small, with just us humans. Then it grew to include all living things, then whole ecosystems. And now it's about justice, right relationships, and trying to fix what's been broken. And I really want to stress this is not just some abstract academic debate. It's real. The way you answer these questions, whether you see the world as a warehouse of resources, a community of individuals, a single living system, or something that needs justice, that shapes everything. It shapes policy, it shapes science, and it absolutely shapes our chances of survival. So, that leaves us with one last massive question to chew on. What is our proper role here? Are we supposed to be a keystone species, using our unique intelligence to help foster balance and health for the whole community? Or have we just been a destructive force? And is our main job now to just get out of the way? Do what we can to repair the damage and give the rest of the world its autonomy back? I don't know the answer, but how we decide to answer it will probably define our future on this planet.